Good evening and welcome to Jazz at the Library. This is our final Jazz at the Library for the spring, and we have 9. For those of you who are not familiar with Jazz at the Library, we have 9 a year. We're starting back up in the fall. It's typically the 3rd Tuesday of the month. So in September, it's going to be the 17th, and Rick Helzer and vocalist Ella Johnson are coming in to do a program on Charles Mingus. So, but you can go to our website, www.jazzfresno.org, and look for that event and all things that are on that are related to jazz on our website. So there are 3 primary sponsors for Jazz at the Library: Jazz Fresno. We're a nonprofit that promotes jazz in the Valley through education and performance. And if you like what you experienced tonight, we are always welcome to what we call investments in jazz, not donations, but investments. You could do it at our back booth back there, or you could do it online. The second primary sponsor is the Fresno County Libraries. And finally, the third primary sponsor is the community of jazz musicians in Fresno that come in and play for us wonderfully. And I guess Mitch will introduce them. If they were here, I would introduce them. The co-sponsors include KFSR 90.7, University radio station, and Woodward Park Friends of the Library. If you haven't already discovered it, on your left there are cookies and there's water. And there's merchandise in the back, Jazz Fresno merchandise, and our presenter, Mitch Holder, has CDs that will be for sale for $10. I want to mention another event. This is that we're having this Saturday. It's called the Jazz Educators Conference. And it is a conference that we put on to educate jazz educators. And it pretty much, it lasts most of the day, and there are a number of things like how to improve your jazz education program, improvisation, developing a rhythm section, different sections. And as a non-musician, I know I go and I always leave feeling, you know, I've got kind of a look into what jazz education is about. So you can go on our website and take a look at it if you want. It's not too late to register. So that's. So it's my pleasure tonight to introduce our presenter, Mitch Holder. Mitch is an LA native. Started playing the guitar at 8 years, and some early influences on the electric guitar were Link Ray and Dwayne Eddy. Mitch has studied with William Pellegrini and Johnny Frisco. But his main influence, who I'm sure he's going to talk about tonight, is Howard Roberts. And Howard is a jazz and studio musician in LA, and Mitch studied with him, and then Howard became his mentor, took him around to the studios when he was doing his studio gigs, and ultimately led to Mitch's lifetime love of being a studio musician. In honor of Howard, who died in 1992, Mitch published a book of transcriptions of recorded work in a book titled The Jazz Guitar Stylings of Howard Roberts. Mitch played between 1974 and 77. He was one of the main guitar players for the Johnny Carson Tonight Show, dating some people, not all. And because of his interest in the history of guitar, he has an association with the Gibson Guitar Company, where he helped design guitars as a Western United States product specialist. There we go. Okay, and finally, as a studio musician, you might imagine that Mitch has many, 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 many credits. In fact, it's about 2 pages long, single-spaced, of all the people, musicians, composers, and so forth that he's worked with. Let me just mention a few in terms of recordings. Barbra Streisand, Willie Nelson, Frank Sinatra. In terms of television, he was, of course, on the Johnny Carson show. He did Jimmy Kimmel as well. And for film, just a sec. Something's Gotta Give. I looked it up, I thought it was a different film. I thought it was Something's Gotta Give, the old Fred Astaire one, and with the Johnny Mercer too. No, it wasn't. Any case, the Muppet movie, he was on that. And finally, some of the composers he worked for, John Williams, Lalo Schifrin, Herbie Hancock. So it's my pleasure to introduce Mitch Holder.
Thank you, Tom. That was more than I can remember. First of all, thank you all for coming. We appreciate it, and I'd like to tell you who I'm playing with tonight. On another guitar is Rich Severson, who you've probably heard here before. Rich is a fixture around here, yeah?
Yeah.
And on bass, John Laufenberger.
Yeah.
On bass, and on drums, Gary Mingler. So, we're gonna play a few tunes. I decided we're gonna play a couple tunes to open this up, and then I'm gonna talk for a while. And there's certain elements of what Tom was talking about and the businesses I've seen it that I want to present to you, and how things have changed so much as they have in so many different areas of our lives in music, and I'm calling the talk Living with Music. So, and it's something all 3 of my cohorts here, we can't live without it, okay? It doesn't matter if, we're making money. We have to be involved with music. It's just all there is to it. So the world is evolving into a different relationship with that, which I'll get into later. In the meantime, we're going to start out with a tune probably most of you know called Autumn Leaves. No. No? It might be bad. Okay, I'm going to play this. So, you know, the word jazz has always baffled me. When I was a kid, jazz simply meant improvised music. You took a set of harmonic chords, progression, and you basically write another song over it, right? That was improvisation. And then over the years, yeah, I've been involved. Let's see, what have I been at? Like Dixieland, I've been involved with, you know, movie scores and so forth. Then there's smooth jazz, crunchy jazz, contemporary jazz. You get it, right? You get the point. There's so many labels now that I still kind of wonder what is jazz? Is jazz still what it was? And it's become, to me, it's become not jazz so much as it's become kind of almost a genre that they picked out to fit the tune that somebody's playing. You know, if somebody's playing like a funk tune or something, like something like that. That's jazz, right? Wait a minute. So, and that's some of what I want to talk about going forward. But before I start doing that, we're going to play one more tune. What are we going to play? Oh, Stella by Starlight. So I'm going to start this, and I'll bring the boys in. that to me, that's a jazz tune. There's a lot to work with on that. All these great standards that over the years, and you know the thing about the standards, I think a lot of people have forgotten, like Autumn Leaves. Autumn Leaves came out of a movie called Autumn Leaves. Any of you recall? And the movie wasn't very popular, but the song, the song lived on. The movie didn't, but the song did. So most of the standards that we've heard over the years have come out of movies. That was the pop music of the day. So what I'd like to, I want to start talking and I want to go back. I'm going to take you, I'm not going to drag this out too much, but I want to kind of give you a little bit of a history of how recording came about and a little bit how they did it back in the 1920s and how it's evolved over the years. So there's an engineer in LA, Al Schmidt. And Al Schmidt, you've all heard Al Schmidt, Nat King Cole, Unforgettable, up to, and way before that, he even did the score, the underscore for the TV show Peter Gunn in 1959, which I don't know, some of you younger ones won't know, but yeah. And my good friend who I was splitting the Tonight Show with, Bob Bain, he's the one that played the original guitar part on Peter Gunn. So, anyway, so at Capitol, Al Schmidt, and he looks so good for his age. I know he's getting up near 90 now. He's been around a long time. And I've hung out with him over the years when we've talked about his background. And, now today, everybody can record. Anyone in this room, you can get some recording gear, go in your bedroom, and record, and it sounds fantastic. And I'll get into the whys of that a little later, but you gotta, this just hit me. I mean, it made sense, but Al started I think it was in the late 20s, in his uncle's studio in New York. So I asked him, I said, well, how did they do things back then? And he said, he said, well, it was like this. It was like, there was one mic in the room. Here's the mic, right? And they'd have whatever size band or if it was an orchestra, they were all sitting around the mic, okay? So he said, and I said, well, how did you handle the balances? What if something was too loud? Oh, well, if the trombone was too loud, I'd go out in the room and I'd say, trombone player, move your chair, do this. Sit here. And his level went down, right? That's how they mixed in those days. Leading up in the modern age, you see all these big consoles with the faders and doing all this and that. They started just by moving the musicians, so that's how recording got started back in the 20s. And as it evolved, 30s, 40s, big bands, all of that. Big bands were the pop music of the 40s, coming out of World War II. And I was surprised to learn it was around in 1946 or 47, there was a recording ban. The Musicians Union forbid anybody to record anything, and it went on for about 3 or 4 years. And the reason was that their point of view was that the recordings were taking the place of musicians' jobs. Okay? So that was their point of contention about that. And guess what the record companies did? Just probably what they do now, the same thing. They recorded as much as they could before that ban went into effect. So some of the companies had stockpiles of music they'd already recorded, and they lied. They said, "Oh no, we recorded all this stuff before the ban," and they would put it out. But eventually, it finally ended, and that became the era of the LP, long playing records, which I found out, I thought, because LPs are vinyl records, and I know a lot of kids have never seen that. You know, the black disc that spins around, you put the needle on it and it plays. 1948 is when they came out with the LP. And it really didn't catch on until the late 50s, middle to late 50s. But when we think about that format, the vinyl format, it went from, let's say, 1955, and then all the way, even through cassettes, because people were recording their albums onto cassettes, playing them in the car, all the way into the 80s. So it had a 30-year span that it was popular, okay? So now, this is where I want to bring up Howard Roberts, because Howard Roberts, if you don't know him, there's one thing that he did that I asked him about it one time. Howard he was a character, and he really, showbiz, he didn't care one iota about what he had done or what this was or any of that. But if you have ever heard something that sounds like this. Ever heard that? Yeah. Twilight Zone. Right, Twilight Zone. That's Howard playing it. Okay? So he got called, and that's what freelance studio work is. You have no idea what you're going to do. They call you up, they say, "He such and such studio next Wednesday, 9 a.m. And you go in and then you see what they need and see what you're going to do. So there was no prep. You just walk in, they put the music down, and you play. Howard was a jazz player. He grew up as a jazz player, and I had quite a number of discussions with him about how come he didn't make his living, because he was so good. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. If you ever get a chance to hear his recordings, you got to hear. This guy was absolutely spectacular. He didn't make his living as a jazz player. He made his living playing in the LA studios. So I'd sit down, we'd chat. He was unlike anyone I've ever met to take lessons from. And let me just give you, here's a scenario of how it came about. My father, who was a doctor, and he loved the fact that I was into music. My mother had been a concert piano player. So music was big in our house. And they had all the Sinatra albums, King Cole albums, Keely Smith albums, everything that was going on. Plus, Percy Faith was instrumental, had a choral group. It was very popular. On MOR, anybody remember what MOR radio? Middle of the road. It was instrumental music of usually pop tunes that, became very popular, and people were buying those albums. So Howard told me, he said, you know what? He said, when in the West Coast Cool era, which was in the early 50s, leading up to towards the late 50s, he said, it was great. He said, there was jazz going on all over LA, and people were going out and playing. I was playing with Miles one night and Dizzy another night. It was great. And then the way he put it, he said, well, around 1960 in LA, jazz got up and went to New York. Okay? So the way he put it to me, he said, so the musicians in LA who wanted to play jazz, they got up and went to New York. A lot of players here in LA went to New York. Howard didn't want to do that. He didn't want to do that. He had been on the road. He didn't like the road. He wanted to stay in LA, and he was very intellectual. He wanted to learn, and he wanted to learn by playing on movie scores with the best composers in town. That's what he wanted to do. Okay, so he said the studio thing for me was a way for me to learn about music, because as it was, he grew up in Phoenix. He didn't graduate high school for various reasons. He didn't graduate high school. He came out here, he came out to LA when he was 20, and he felt like he didn't know enough. He wanted to search out all the best instructors he could find to teach him what he felt he wasn't onto, okay? And he pursued that, and he got really good at it. So, in the course of the 60s, so I met him 1966. And in 1966, LA was a hotbed of jazz on television, jazz scores on television, and it was a hotbed of music back then. And Howard was the first call guy. He was the guy everybody wanted. If they needed a jazz solo, get Howard, period. That was it, okay? I had another hero before Howard. His name was Barney Kessel, which, if you're too young, you wouldn't know Barney got me interested in jazz. I was interested, oh yeah, play a little bit of Link Ray. Anybody, raise your hands if you remember Link Ray. And Rumble, you remember Rumble's Rumble?
Yeah.
Right? It was a big, so I didn't know what jazz was. This was before, but I heard this thing, and I'm not gonna, hopefully I won't play too loud, but it went something like, I gotta get to the last part. So blues. Here it comes. And then he goes up and does a solo. All of that. I went nuts. I went, what the heck? What is that? Right? So it was that tune in Link Ray. It was Link Ray and the Rayman, W-R-A-Y-M-E. He was just a renegade. The guy was a renegade. The other played. He goes, People's Key of Me, which is. And I was on the phone. I said, okay. We had a great time. So meanwhile, my father, back to my father, who was the doctor, he had patients who were musicians. One of his patients was a studio violin player. And besides being his patient, they were friends, and they used to go out to dinner with wives and so forth. So the violinist's name was Marvin Lamonic. So Marvin did Academy Awards, he did all these movies, Sinatra, he did everything. He tells my dad, he says, you gotta get Mitch with Howard Roberts. You gotta get him studying with Howard Roberts. So my dad said, who's that? No. So he told him. My dad was one thing that he did for me that is I cherish. He used to bring records home sporadically. First thing he came home with a Segovia record, you know, and I put that on. Wow. Classical. He took me to see him twice live. I got to hear Andre Segovia. I'll never forget this, right? Another time he brings me Sabika's flamenco. And I listened to that. And Sabika's was the flamenco. I said, wow, you know, how do you do that? So then, after Sabika's, what does he bring me? Chet Atkins. Listen to all this, you know. And a funny thing about that, when I used to do sessions, 90% of the time they don't want you to be you, they want you to be somebody else. So the first time that I got a call, and there was an answering service used to put the calls out. An answering service would call us and give us dates. And I got this call, and they said, yeah, be here at 2 o'clock, and Chet Atkins. And I about froze, because the last thing I heard Chet do, he played, I think it was America the Beautiful, And there was another, it was a very,
Star Stretcher.
Star Stretcher, yeah. He played these two songs together, right? Which
Yeah.
only he could do that. So I'm thinking, God, what if they want me to do that? But it wasn't that. And that's what I learned about doing studio work. It's all about the sound. If you get the right sound, you're pretty close to doing a good job. So what do they want? They want that. That's what they want. So, okay, I can do that, right? So that's how that went. So anyway, so then my father brings me home a Howard Roberts record called Whatever's Fair. The first tune, Shadow Your Smile. And everybody did it real slow. Even in the movie, I forget, I think it was Sandpiper. Sandpiper, right? Yeah. That's another song that came out of a movie. And Howard did that movie, so he had picked that song to do. But he did it as a swing tune. So instead of playing it as a ballad like everybody was doing, he did it like... like that. And I heard that, and I went, wow. It just blew me away. So I listened to this whole album. A little later, my father comes back in the room, and he says, so what do you think of that album? And I said, wow. I said, you know, I've seen these guys. I've seen Howard in my Gibson catalog. I've seen pictures of him, but I had no idea who he plays. He's incredible. And then he says, my dad, he says, how would you like to take lessons? And I was like, I didn't. I said, are you kidding? You know, are you kidding? He said, no. I said, Marvin's going to set it up, the violin player, and you're going to study with Howard. And I was like, oh my God, how am I going to do this, right? So you know, like somebody's going to give you lessons. He said, well, show up at my house and we'll get you started. I'll give you some material. So Marvin talks to Howard. Howard talks to Marv. Marv calls my dad and said, tell Mitch to be out in front of Universal Studios next Tuesday at 1:30. And I'm kind of, why? That's what he wants you to do. And you got to, back then I really didn't know what studio work was, so I really didn't understand why we going to Universal Studios. There was no tours then. So anyway, so I had seen pictures of him, and I'm standing out. It's 1:30 that next Tuesday. How am I going to know him? How is he going to know me? But I'm the only one standing out in front of Universal. Here comes this little red Porsche. Drives up, stops right in front of me, door flies open. I look in the car, I recognize him, it's Howard. He says, hop in. This is me first meeting him, right?
How old were you?
Well, 16, because I was driving. I drove myself to, yeah. I was 16 when I started. So I was a naive 16 too. But anyway, so we drive onto the lot. We go through the gate, drive onto the lot, and I'm looking around, and I'm thinking to myself, how did I get here? Anyway, so we proceed to park, walk into stage 10 at Universal. Stage 10 is the music stage where all the classic movie scores of the Universal movies that you've ever heard in your entire life, they were all recorded on this sound stage. Just absolutely historic, okay? We walk onto stage 10, and I'm looking around, and it was for a show. Ben Gazzara was a star called Run for Your Life. They were scoring Run for Your Life. This is 1966 when I met him. So, and Pete Rugolo was the composer. He was a jazz. Pete Rugolo was a great jazz writer. And anyway, so there was a horn section. I remember there was a horn section. I didn't see any of them. All I focused on was the rhythm section. And the rhythm section, if you know any of the players, the jazz players back then, starting with Shelly Manne, who's playing drums, okay? 2 guitars, Howard and Barney Kessel. So, I'm hitting my 2 heroes, right? Joe Mondragon, who you might not know, Joe Mondragon was a famous studio bass player. He could play jazz, but that's not what he did. He was so busy in the studios, he was a studio bass player, and that was it. He was great. It was him and a piano player who didn't play jazz either, Artie Kane. You probably never heard of him. This piano player, he was so good that they told me that he could literally sight read anything. You can give him a piano concerto, he could sit down and give him a tempo, and he'll just rip it right off. So I was like, this is the caliber of players that were in the studios. This is why Howard wanted to be around these people, because he learned so much from them. So anyway, so I'm taking this all in, and what is this? And then there's a screen kind of like that panel in the back with the show going on, and Pete Rubin is conducting, and they're playing, and I'm like going, wow. So that was my introduction to Howard. So then it's like, okay, come on over to the house, we'll start working. So we started working. I was with him about 4 years, on and off. I'd call him up, he was so fun. He was very, as I said, he was very intelligent. His IQ had to be way up there. He could sit and talk to real rocket scientists and understand everything they were talking about. Anyway, so he stopped the lesson one day, and he says, "Come on, we gotta go somewhere." In the middle of the lesson, I said, "Where are we going?" He said, "Just come on." So we get in the car and drive around about 2 blocks, and we went to this place called Valley Music Reproductions, and we walked in and said, "Howard, what do we need here?" "Yeah, you'll see." Walk in, and he goes to the counter, and he's looking at the counter, and he's pointing at a clear triangle, a drafting triangle, clear. In those days, you could get them at Art Supply and all that. So anyway, they had it at the music reproduction because copyists would use triangles to draw straight lines and so forth. So he says, "Get that." So I got it. I didn't know what we were going to do. I thought, we're going to draw pictures or something. Maybe we're going to design a building. Which I think Howard probably could have done that. Anyway, we go back to the house, and he pulls out a piece of music manuscript, and he goes, "Well, for instance, if you want to make bar lines, you take a straight edge, and you go 4 bars per line, and you map it out so they're all in line with each other." And I'm watching this going, wow. And then for the treble clef is hard. It's at a squiggle at the beginning of every line on the left. It's hard to do it freehand, but he said, "Well, you got to make that initial line straight. So use your straight edge, go like that, and then you go like this and make your treble clef." Yow. So to make this long story shorter, that triangle has been in almost daily use, except when I'm on the road. Since then, it's sitting on my music stand now. I've used it several times this week. This is the essence of how Howard presented things. He presented things, and he had a column in one of the big guitar magazines every month. And a lot of the players who knew, they said, "Howard gives you stuff you can use." And that's what he was about. It wasn't about, well, if you take this scale right here, and you take this scale and you do it this and this. It wasn't about that. It was about, you need to make music, and here's how you do it. So he was such an influence on me that, and in the course of the years that I was with him, he'd call me up and say, "Well, meet me at Gold Star," which is where Phil Spector used to work. They made all kinds of records at Gold Star. It was the first place I ever worked. Meet me at Gold Star. We'll finish up, we'll go eat lunch. We'll go to Musso Frank's and eat lunch. Like Musso Frank's, famous Hollywood restaurant, like being in New York. You walk in there, and the waiters go, "What do you want?" It's just classic New York. It's still going. It's still going. So we go there, we'd have lunch. sometimes we went to do bars. He loved Welsh rarebit. We went to do bars, and then he'd help. Every time we went there, that's what he did. So he was a huge influence on me. He took me to record dates. He took me to jingles. Jingles were 1-hour dates where you did commercials, radio, TV. Mainly radio and TV. You'd be out there an hour, you'd get a track, and you're out there, the singers would come in, they'd do it. A lot of times those jingles would be on that night, you know. So I got to see what studio work was. And the thing that hit me was the fact that, boy, you know, actually you can actually stay in LA, you can stay here, work in the studios, and be home for dinner. That appealed to me. Okay? And I did go on the road. I went out with Sergio Mendes on the pop side, Brazilian pop side, and I was with Peggy Lee for a while, and I discovered that I didn't like playing the same songs every night. I didn't like having to play the same little fill so the singer could get their pitch. I wanted to play something once, and that was it. Okay, so I figured, boy, if I do studio work, that's what I'll do. I'll go in, you play what you have to play, and that's the end of it. You go do something else. I like that. I like that. So, so Howard was a huge influence. He went on to, you know, I told you about the education thing. He didn't graduate high school. He went on to do guitar workshops, clinics, teaching. He did, what, 4 or 5 days? They last, or 3 days? 3 days. Intense, very intense. And he finally decided he didn't like having to go to Dallas and go to Chicago and bringing all the stuff to the students. He said, you know what? I should start a school and have the students come to me. Right? So he started a school called Guitar Institute of Technology, known as GIT. He wrote the curriculum, he got it going, and it became, then they got Bass Institute of Technology, BIT, Percussion Institute, PIT, and then keyboard, KIT. Okay, so it was basically the rhythm players. And it's still going now. It's now called Musicians Institute. It's in Hollywood. It's still going. And so he was a huge influence. His playing was a huge influence. He influenced literally thousands of players all over the world. And unfortunately, he passed away in '92. He had prostate cancer, and we lost him. But in one instance, so a lot of people said, did he get you on any dates? Did you do any sessions with Howard? I did one session that Howard was on. Me and Howard were on. And Percy Faith, remember I talked to Percy about Percy Faith a little while ago. He had the MOR, middle of the road. He was on the radio, very popular. And when I was growing up, my parents had those records, and I heard this melodic guitar playing. I didn't know who it was, but the sound caught my ear because it was so nice. Well, Al Hendrickson was the guitar player who was on all the Percy Faiths. Or no, it was Ray Conniff. I'm sorry, it was Ray Conniff. He had the Ray Conniff singers. Same genre. Okay, so it was Ray Conniff. Al Hendrickson was Ray Conniff's guitar player, played those melodies. Al Hendrickson was the third guitar player on this session. So it was myself, Al Hendrickson, and Howard. Now, protocol in those days, there were 3 guitars on sessions, 4 guitars on sessions, sometimes more. And the protocol was that either whoever the guitar player is who works for a particular leader, he's first book. And then whoever's the next, in terms of how long they've been around, their status, would be second book, and then the young punk would be third book. So there's 3 of us. So I thought, well, Al's going to play 1, Howard's going to play 2, and I'm going to be 3. We get to this session, it's at A&M Studios, it was Herb Alpert's studio. Our names are on the books. So my name's on book 1, Al Hendrickson's name is on book 2. Howard Roberts is on book 3. And I'm like, this isn't happening. And I was like, I was beside myself. So, Al and I were playing electric guitars. Howard was playing an acoustic, a 6-string steel string acoustic, like you play for a country thing. He was playing rhythm. And we had our parts, and the first tune was, we would usually do 3 tunes in a 3-hour session. Sessions go in 3 hours, so they figure tune an hour, get a tune an hour done. So we got the first tune done, no problem. Second tune, we're doing a run through. Here comes the melody. I got the melody. It's in book 1. I play the melody. Ray, right after I started playing, he stops. He says, "Whoa!" He says, "Mitch." He says, "That melody that you have in bar 42." He says, "Can you play that like Al Hendrickson?" Yeah, and Howard, he's a character. I hear Howard. So I came back with what I figured might be a solution. I said, "Well, Ray, Al's right here. Why don't we switch parts?" To which Ray says, "No, I want you to play the part, but could you play like Al Hendrickson?" Now Al and Howard are both. And I'm sitting there going, "Thanks, guys, for helping me out here." So I said, okay, so I have a tendency to have a bright sound, meaning trebly guitar sound out of the amp. So a lot of times I have to accommodate that. So I thought, well, my sound that I have now is more contemporary. It's not like it was on those records that I heard Al. So I rolled the treble off, got a darker sound. We played it again, recorded it. That was it. It was fine. Ray never said another word. So we finished the day. We did one more tune. And then Howard and I were walking together out back of A&M to the parking lot. And Howard he had this way of looking at you where he was tall and he kind of rear up like this and give you this look. And he looks at me like this and he goes, "Mitch, you handled that situation admirably." And we both absolutely fell out laughing. I practically fell on the ground. And that was my one session with Howard. Okay, so I'll never ever forget that. All right, so going on, let's move on. 60s. I predominantly got into the studios, busy in the studios in the 70s. I did work at Gold Star for quite a while in the 60s, but my studio career really took off in the 70s. And in the early 70s, I was on the road with Sergio Mendes for about a year, here with Peggy Lee. And they were completely opposite. Playing with Sergio, I was just flat out. I was the contemporary guy, so I was playing all the loud stuff in the midst of all the Brazilian. And they had a Brazilian guitar player, Oscar Castro Neves, who was fantastic. So it was the two of us. Then Peggy Lee. Peggy Lee is an exercise in when not to play. Restraint. I mean, there were some of her arrangements when she was singing. You could hear a pin drop, and I had to be just careful how I plucked the string, that it didn't pop too much. I mean, it was an exercise in total polarity opposite of Sergio. Sergio was playing. So, did it help me when I started doing sessions? Boy, you betcha. Because the old saying is, it's not what you play, it's what you leave out. And it's so true. And I've heard players who, you could put everything in the kitchen sink, and they'll play one note and fracture it. Just, wow, just goes almost right through you. So those are the kind of players I was attracted to. And then when I started, and here's how the technology had come, even since the Beatles. The Beatles, there's tracks. There started out with, there was just one track back when even back when Al Schmidt was pulling the trombone player away from the microphone, they were going right to disc. They were recording straight to disc. There were no overdubbing or anything. Then when stereo came along, went to 2-track, left and right. That's how they mixed. Meanwhile, they needed so many tracks to record different instruments. So it started out with 2-track, then for a while it went 3-track, then 4-track, the Beatles era. All the Beatles records were recorded on 4-track recorders, everything, which is absolutely amazing, okay? And it can be done. You don't need, the moral of the story, you don't need a lot of elaborate gear to get a good recording. So, then they doubled it, went to 8-track. By the time I started, 72, around then, 8-track. 8-track was the thing. Then maybe a year later, went to 16-track. Okay, then they could really get creative. And the mixes got better, and the stereo mixes got better. Then eventually it went to 24-track. 2-inch analog tape, reel-to-reel, 24 tracks. So you'd see on the machine 24 VU meters. And that was the standard. That's what everybody was using. And those of you who are old enough to remember, and I have to say, in the course of making a living as a guitar player, I'm so fortunate, along with my cohorts, to have been able to make a living playing music, doing what I wanted to do. I really thought, I just wanted to record. That's all I wanted to do. And as things were, and if I just give you an example, maybe if there were 10 sessions going on in town, which there was a lot more than that, say there was 3 guitar players on every day, that's 30 guitar players that were working, okay? Day in, day out, all day long, 30, maybe more, and everybody was able to make a living. Now, as things progressed, then it was overdubbing, so they would do a rhythm track, with a drummer, keyboard, bass, guitar. They do a basic rhythm track, then they say, guitar, you stay after, we're gonna put on a couple of parts. So now you're replacing 2 people. And you get paid. You get paid another check every time you overdub. But it changed the scheme of things. Not so many players were working anymore. And this filtered into other instruments too. To the point of, in the late 70s, and this is when the record business really peaked. Really peaked, was going into the late 70s. And I remember, this is a good story. I did a movie at Warner Brothers in, I think it was 1977. And I walked in, and Warner Brothers on both stages, the 2 stages, they had a little sign when you walk in, and it tells you what the movie is. So I'm walking up to the door, and I'm looking at Saturday Night Fever. And I'm thinking, must be about a ER. And on the weekends they get real busy, and boy, everybody's got a fever, and it's a mess. So, well, no, that's not what it was. That album, Saturday Night Fever, was the biggest selling album until Thriller, Michael Jackson, came out. So this is the power that music had. It made good livings for a lot of people. And we were happy because we were able to do it. We were lucky because, let's face it, they can't call every musician in town to do these sessions because there's just not enough of them. There's too many musicians and not enough work, right? Okay, so now let's go towards the end of the 70s, and it's 1979. I was trying to remember the year. I have all my date books, and I went back about 3 weeks ago. I said, I got to nail down this date. I got to see when this happened. And I found it was 1979, which kind of blew me away. But here's what happened. That particular week, it's funny, I was working at A&M quite a bit with different people. I was working with one producer one day, then Herb Alpert was a producer another day, and we were flitting around. What happened was, there was one of those sessions that, on a break, the rhythm section. We were taking, every hour there's a 10-minute break. That's the union rule. You get a 10-minute break. So we're taking a break. Herb Alpert saunters over to us and says, hey guys, come here, I want to show you something. So, in a nutshell, A&M's laid out in a big U. The hallway goes like this. You got Studio A, Studio B, Studio C. The last studio they built, which Herb Alpert built, was way around the hall on the other side, Studio D. So he took us into Studio D. And we walk into the booth in Studio D, and here are these reel-to-reel machines sitting there. 32 VU meters. The tape is ½ inch. And there's two guys with lab coats, white lab coats, down to the floor, standing there like this. Sony. And Herb, he's standing like this. He says, fellas, these are the world's first digital recorders. And I was, digital, what's digital? What's digital? Digital? So Herb says, roll it. And there's no one in the studio itself. There's a concert piano, lids up, sitting there. Engineer turns on the machine. It's a solo classical piano piece, and you can hear the pedals going. You can hear the player breathing, and we're all looking out. Who's playing? We're looking at what's going on. Nobody's there, right? So I'm inquisitive. When it was over with, I got in the Sony guy. I got right in his face, the lab coat. I said, "What's digital?" And he gave me 0 and 1s and on and off. And you know what word came into my head that scared the living daylights out of me? Infinity. 0, 1, 0, 0, 0, 0. I mean, then I asked him, what are the ramifications of this? Okay? And he says, you know how everybody has their vinyl albums, and when they want to play something in their car, they record them onto a cassette, and they put the cassette in their car player, and they can play it in the car. I said, yeah. He said, you know what happens if you take a copy, that cassette copy, and you run another cassette? I said, yeah, it degrades, but you make 3 copies on it, it just sounds totally garbled. He says, well, this recording that you just heard, I could make a copy of that, we could make a copy of that, to the millionth copy, and it's going to sound exactly like this. And I went, oh my God. And the reason that I had such a reaction is because I could see how digital was going to affect more than just music. And I obviously couldn't get the whole picture, but I was thinking photos, print. My mind just started going. I said, this is going to change the world. This is in 1979. Okay? So, that night, another night I'll never forget. After that, occasionally when I was in the studios, there would be some of these engineers, and they were working on the digital format. And I would ask them, I said, well, how does it work you got records that spin around? How would the digital format work? He said, well, that's the problem. He said, we could put a whole album or more than we could put 2 albums on a microchip, about like this. He said, our problem is how do you package that? That was their big problem. Okay, so what happened? CDs happened. CDs were round, smaller. They still spun around, no needle. But it was the same kind of look, I guess, right? And that caught on. So CDs started, by 84, 85, CDs started taking over to the point where people would take their vinyl albums and replace them with CDs. The record companies love this. So more income, more money. Anyway, so how long did CDs last? Well, you know what? Most people aren't buying CDs anymore. As far as the CD business, people are either downloading, streaming. That's the main thing. And I'll tell you about the ramifications of that in a second. I think we should be able to play a couple
Play one, huh?
tunes. You want me to keep going?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll go.
All right. So, well, how you doing? How are you still awake? Okay. Just maybe I'll do just a little bit. So actually, the life of the CD really didn't last as long as the LP did. So things, and we all know everything is doing this. And Howard died in 1992, which is before the internet and all that. He already knew about it because he was reading electronics, he was reading Psychology Today, he was reading Scientific American, he understood all this stuff. He knew what these people were doing. And he knew about the internet. I heard him talking about it. I was like, what are you talking about? You know, what? Anyway, he said, oh yeah, the military has this now. It's gonna channel into the consumer. I didn't believe him, you know, but he was right. Anyway, so the CD goes away, and as a musician, besides my studio work, and the studio work, probably from about 77 to early 80. 80 we had a strike and it messed everybody up. I was doing about 600 3-hour sessions a year, from 77, 8, 9, to the point from one day to the next I couldn't keep track of much anything. I was just going from one thing to the next. Then we had a strike and then things simmered down. Everybody got hit. I think that was based on the fact that our employers, the producers and directors, they knew about cable. They knew about cable. We didn't, but they did. And what they did was they did it with everybody, you know, the actors, the IATSE, which is the construction people, stagehands and so forth. Everybody got knocked. Power just went away. Then the cable negotiations come up. And that changed everything. Before all of this, there was a period of time, and I had a home studio, probably starting in about 1976, I had a 4-track, and I started working out of the house. And over the years, I got a 24-track. I was doing projects in the house. I had clients. I was writing music every month, getting these songs placed. And then as the technology got more advanced, everybody was doing it. So it got to the point, and I had a good flow of income coming in from this, supplementary to my recording income. So when everybody was able to record, say if I got 3 tunes in a month, then it went to 2 tunes. Then it went to 1 tune. And then a lot of times with no tunes. So I'm not going to sit there and write 3 tunes myself, perform, have to record them, get somebody into a saxophone player or something, mixing, doing all of that, and they don't take anything. I said, no, I'm out. That doesn't make any business sense at all. That's like spinning my wheels. And the reason that it happened was because everybody was able to record. So that continued. This was before computers. Computers was like 2005, around then. So as we went, the monetary aspects of writing music, writing songs, selling albums, the return to the artist was going. It wasn't even going like this, it was going like this. Okay, so these days, I still have some songs in circulation. I'll get a royalty statement from maybe Universal Music or somebody like that. And yeah, look at this thing, and there's all these columns of stuff. I said, well, what's the bottom line? Let's look at the bottom line. I go to the bottom line, 68 cents. Okay? Now, I used to supplement my income doing this, as did others. In fact, I'll go one more. In the 70s, I used to go to several offices in Middle of LA on Sunset Boulevard and Wilshire Boulevard. Warner Brothers, Screen Gems, Columbia, A&M, they all had songwriting factories, like the Brill Building in New York, which the most famous writer that came out of the Brill Building was Carole King. You know, I Feel the Earth Move, all those great songs. She was a staff composer in the Brill Building. What happens with a staff composer, they write all these songs. If one of their songs hits, they don't need to be a staff writer anymore because everybody knows them. They'll call them directly, so they quit, and that's what Carole King did. Anyway, I used to call, I had friends that did that. They made a good living. They sat in a cubicle with a piano, and they wrote songs all day long, and they got a salary. Lots of them, cubbyholes. Hey, let's have lunch next Wednesday. Great. Meet me at the office. Okay, probably walk down and have lunch. It disappeared. There's no money in songwriting anymore. Even if you Lady Gaga. So how are your royalties in? She'll say, well, I got 4.9 million streams, and I got a check for $1,700. What's happened. The monetization of music is gone. And one of the jokes that we used to hear from people who heard, well, what do you do? Is, oh, I'm a musician. I said, oh yeah, well, what's your day job? Now it's true. Now most musicians cannot make a living playing music, writing music, recording music. Okay? So, and the ramifications of that is just something that I thought that, it's impossible to ever happen. I said, what would solve this? Would be to eliminate all music on the entire planet, whether you're in an elevator, you're in your car, you're at a movie, you're listening. Eliminate all music on the planet for 24 hours and see how people react to that. Because we all have to remember that music has a big impact on our emotions, on our creativity, and just on our feelings and liking music for what it is. And if there's no songwriters, there's not going to be any new songs. So one of the points when I say living with music is that I feel that, the musicians, we all know the predicament musicians are in. And fortunately, I survived. I have a nice pension now. I don't have to worry about getting dates and all that. But I know a couple of the young guys that are doing all the session work now, and that's about all it is. About 3. There's 3 guitar players doing all the work, and they do it out of their house. They got gives them a memory stick. So okay, let's overdub on this, and they do it, and then that's it. That's how they work now. So there's not a lot of people playing together either. I can't function that way. I'm a reactor. I discovered that I was a reactor doing Motown sessions and R&B sessions for different producers. There used to be 4 guitars. We had such an amazing selection of guitar players on these things. And I don't know if you know any of their names. I know you know one name, Ray Parker Jr. Ray Parker Jr., Ghostbusters. Who are you going to call? Ray Parker Jr. He's a fantastic rhythm guitar player. This guy is unbelievable. He was on all these dates. Okay? Anybody heard of David T. Walker? Anybody? You've heard him. He does a lot of Carole King records, and you'll hear him what's his name? The real big disco leader singer. Who? Barry White. Yeah, and you hear stuff like that. It's T. Dude, he'd come up with all these things. You just call him up and say, T, just play whatever you want. It'd be perfect. So it'd be Ray Parker, David T. Walker, and then the infamous Wah Wah Watson. And why did he have this nickname Wah Wah Watson? Wah 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 Wah, the Wah Wah pedal, which is called a crybaby for obvious reasons. Wah Wah took it to a whole other level. It was unbelievable. Okay? Then they'd have the readers, because the arranger on these sessions was Gene Page. Gene Page's arrangement, they were all black. They were just notes all over the place. If you weren't a good reader, you couldn't do this. So there'd be one reader, and then Ray Parker and Wah Wah Watson and David T., 4 guitar players, and Ray Parker would come up with something like so fast that I would never ever play before him. I just wait to see what he's going to do. But I was one of the readers, so for a while I just read the part. Now that's what I did. Lee Ritenour was a reader. Who else? Jay Gray, who played Peg on Steely Dan, the solo of Peg. He was one of the readers. So one time they hired 2 readers on a session, on an R&B session. Pardon? Oh, a reader. Yeah, I'm sorry. Sight reading music, where you don't have time to practice anything. They put the music down, they count it off, and you got to play. So there's certain players can do that. Others can't. David T. Walker didn't need to. So just play. So this one session they hired 2 readers, me and somebody else, I think Jay Braden. And I heard the producers in the booth were going, what are we going to do? We got Jay, we got Mitch, and we only got 1 reading part. What are we going to do? So let Mitch play rhythm. So, okay, hey Mitch, just play rhythm. Play whatever you want. Boy, I've never been in that chair before. What am I going to do? That was the day. That session was the day that I realized I was a reactor, because I would hear a keyboard part or another guitar part or whatever it was, and there would be a space somewhere. And when I heard the space, I would put something into space, just there, where there's nothing else, so I wouldn't conflict with anybody. So anyway, that's how I learned I was a reactor, and it was one more thing to add on my cards, my deck of cards that I could do. One of the things that, I got to tell you this story too, Tootsie, the movie Tootsie. It Might Be You, Stephen Bishop. So I was playing acoustic on that. Dave Grusin wrote that. He wrote the score to Tootsie. And a lot of times in these record dates, the singers weren't there. We were just playing the track with no singers. Sometimes they'd have a demo. We always liked to hear the song because we wanted to know what the song was about and how the melody went and where the spaces were and so forth. So Stephen Bishop wasn't there. We were just doing the track. So there was this, so on acoustic, I don't know what prodded me to do it, but I just did it every time it happened. I played this. I just did that every time. No idea how to. And if you put something and it's on top of a lyric, they just take it out. So I get rid of that. So then I hear the track. I'm driving in the car one day and I hear the track, and I'm hearing, but it might be you. I went, oh my God. Every time there was a space, I played it. Every time, and it fit. It could have been the whole opposite thing. But like I said, I reacted to it and I put it there because I thought it needed it. And I knew, well, if it covers up the vocal, nothing I can do about that. They'll duck it out. But it was in the perfect spot. And then I was thinking, gee, I wonder if Stephen Bishop had been there singing about it, played the same thing. You never know. But anyway, so that's how I knew I was a reactor. Yeah. Oh, yeah? Oh, really? Oh. Okay, well, I guess.
I think he thought it was 11, right?
I thought what?
We're going to 11?
Oh. I have a habit of doing this. I'll just say that. Yes.
Well, you play by ear. You play by ear.
Well, that's a very good question, because a lot of musicians think that music is rocket science, and when you hear them talking about it, it sounds like rocket science. And music is not rocket science. It took me a long time to learn this, to the point when I say reactor, that's exactly how you become a reactor. You should use your ears. So I have quite a few students now, and I first thing I'll say to them, I say, okay, now tell me what's the most important instrument that you have? And they're like, oh, my guitar. No, this. Because in jazz, the best improvisers in jazz, and I've talked to so many, mainly horn players. I'll ask them, and I did this when I was a teenager. I went up to the saxophone player and I said, what are you thinking about when you're soloing? Are you thinking about scales, or are you thinking about, what are you thinking about? And he said, well, sometimes I'm thinking about I got to pick up a quart of milk on the way home. And then sometimes I'm thinking, I got to take the garbage out when I get home. And other times, I might have had a fight with my wife, and I'm thinking about that. And I said, you mean you're not thinking about scales and modes and all these things? He says, no, I'm just playing. Oh, that hit me like a sledgehammer. Oh, I'm just playing. That's this. So when you hear a chord, like you hear a something like that, and there's a scale. Can't get much out of that. But if I go, let's see. That's just the ear. That's enough. And the other thing that I did one time when I was playing a solo, I purposely stopped. I learned that from tenor players. Tenor players, when they're streaming notes, if they're not sure what they want to play, they stop playing. Guitar players, they never stop playing. Stop playing. Listen to what you're doing. So anyway. Tune, all right. Anyway, so the main thing that I want to convey is tonight that music needs to be monetized in some way going forward. I don't think it's going to happen in the rest of my lifetime, but the way we're going, there isn't going to be any music on the planet anymore. So bear that in mind and tell the youngsters who are mostly getting their music for free, something's got to change. So that's my moral for today. What should we play?
We have all the things you want.
Okay. Okay. All right, we're going to close out with another standard jazz tune, All the Things You Are. All right? Let's just go right along.
Yeah.
1, 2, 3.
Mitch for coming all the way up here. You know, you've heard him play 1,000 times, but you never knew it was him.
That's the way we want it.
That's the way you want it, yeah. He's incognito. But a couple of things about Mitch that, of course, he's not going to tell you, but one of them is, for a long time, he was the only guy to ever quit the Tonight Show band. Because he was so busy in the studios, he didn't want to go to Vegas and play with Doc. And it's another story for another. I'm not going to give him the mic. But I'm
Not worth losing sleep.
But yeah, anyway, Mitch has got a long history, and I'm just really thankful. He was a big influence to me, by the way. I studied with Mitch in college. Taught me everything I didn't know. Yeah. Anyway, thanks for coming, you guys.
Recycle.